We're going to now turn to part 2 of Module 6, which is found in Chapter 12 of our textbook. And this second part of Module 6 focuses on private enterprise and development. Our learning objectives this time is fourfold. 1, we want to understand the importance of the private sector to development and poverty alleviation. 2, we want to identify the different roles of small and large firms in development. 3, we want to differentiate between different kinds of strategies employed by multinationals and their effects. 4th, we want to distinguish between the direct effect of the private sector on development and its indirect effect as mediated by government regulation and in collaboration with other actors via partnerships. Our chapter overview is as follows. This chapter introduces one of the most important and yet most misunderstood and underanalyzed actors in international development: private enterprise. Attaining the Sustainable Development Goals will require private investments and private actors playing key roles in development. After reading the chapter, we should be able to differentiate between small and large firms and the different roles that they play in development. Entrepreneurs, especially those in the informal sector, face important challenges related to a lack of property rights and government support. And this can hamper economic development. Multinationals also should be regarded as differentiated actors that apply a wide range of strategies with diverse effects on development. However, this chapter also underlines the need to consider the role of the state as a mediator. How well the state regulates and bargains with firms has a significant impact on whether they have a good or bad effect on development. Some states are better at getting more from multinationals than others. However, let's note that international investment agreements sometimes reduce the policy space available to governments. In recent years, multinationals have begun to act directly as development agents through corporate social responsibility programs that engage communities and by forming partnerships with government agencies and civil society organizations to address development problems. So, briefly, the effects of private enterprise on development depend on the size of the company, the strategy that it employs, mediation by the state, and the way the company engages other actors, such as civil society. Companies by themselves are not entirely responsible for the successes or the failures of development. Here are the key terms that you encounter in this chapter. First is bilateral investment treaties. These are agreements that enunciate the principles of treatment that foreign investors are entitled to receive from host governments and that permit multinational corporations to sue host governments in international arbitration tribunals for breach of obligations. Second is corporate social responsibility. This is the idea that corporations have a moral responsibility beyond their shareholders to a broader set of individuals and groups known as stakeholders affected by the activities of the firm, including employees and local communities. Corporate social responsibility is a voluntary commitment of firms to improve the quality of their relationship with stakeholders. Third, emerging multinational corporations, or EMNCs. These are multinationals based in developing countries, particularly dynamic emerging economies such as Brazil, China, India, and South Africa. Fourth, enclave. This describes operations by a company that have a few beneficial links to the rest of the economy, and it is often thought to be associated with extractive industries like mining, or just taking out the raw materials from a country without any value added, and also with the activities of multinational corporations. Fifth, entrepreneur or entrepreneurship. These are people with a special ability to combine the factors of production in new, innovative ways to cause economic growth. And six is foreign direct investment, FDI. These are investments made across national borders that has a physical presence or corporate form, such as a branch plant, and therefore a degree of control over how the investment is put to use, as differentiated from indirect investment, also known as portfolio capital or foreign portfolio investment. Then we also have number 6, free trade. Free trade is a political economic concept popularized in the 19th century, premised on the belief that the removal of barriers to trade and the limitation of state intervention in economic and social interactions within and between nation states would provide the greatest social gains for all countries involved. Significantly revived since the 1970s, free trade is supported on the grounds that state regulation of the market is inherently inefficient and wasteful, while an unregulated market operates as an efficient, invisible hand that responds accurately to undistorted market signals of supply and demand. And the person in the 19th century most associated with the idea of free trade is, of course, Adam Smith, a UK economist. Another term that you will encounter is the global value chain, or GVC. This concept was developed in the 1990s to describe how multinational corporations organize their production across borders in chains of related activities, many of which may be performed by distinct firms. Typically, the higher value added activities are found in the developed countries where the head offices of multinational corporations are located, while low value added and labor intensive parts of the production process are contributed by local firms in developing countries. Then we also are going to encounter the informal sector. This is the part of the economy where individuals and enterprises do business without being officially registered or regulated. It is usually associated with very small or micro enterprises. Then we have informality. Informality is the condition of existing in the informal economy, including having weak property rights, poor access to financing, and limited potential for growth. Another term, international division of labor. This is a concept that emerged in the imperialism literature of the early 20th century, which recognized that countries served different purposes within the global economy. Developing countries exported commodities or natural resources to the developed countries, who in turn exported manufactured goods back to them. Microfinance is used to describe small loans targeted as small businesses, often owned by families and often run by women. Multinational corporations, or MNCs, are corporations that invest across national borders and or establish branch plants, subsidiaries, or other operations in more than one country. Usually, MNC is used as a synonym of transnational corporations, or TNCs, or multinational enterprises. And it is used, quite often by social scientists and the media. Obsolescence bargaining model is a model of state-firm relations developed by Raymond Vernon that argues that each actor, state and firm, want to capture a greater share of the benefits of foreign investment, and that over time, the relative strength of each actor changes. At the time of the investment, the multinational corporation is in the stronger position, but over time, the initial contract over the terms of investment erodes as the state becomes more powerful. OLI paradigm was developed by John H. Dunning, and it also is known as the eclectic approach. This is a theory that argues that in the internationalization of multinational corporations, we can explain their actions through the interaction of three factors related to their ownership. One is O. O is location specific. And L is about internalization. I is about advantages relative to non-internationalized firms. Partnerships are alliances between two of the following three actors: businesses, governments, and civil society organizations. Such alliances are invoked by promoters as a way to creatively address development problems that cannot be effectively solved by any single actor. Policy space. The real room that governments have to enact policy, given the constraints imposed on them by international agreements and multinational corporations. Property rights regime. This is the legal framework defining which assets and whose assets are officially defined as property and recognized by others as such. Having legally recognized property that can serve as collateral is essential to the ability to access bank loans necessary to develop a small business. There are also public-private partnerships, or PPPs. This is related to privatization. It usually involves the provision of public services by private companies working together with state agencies, often through government subcontracting to private companies, which are thought to be able to provide the service more cheaply, have more incentives to cut costs, and respond to customers. And they are also thought to have the expertise to apply the latest techniques and management to a problem. For example, new roads in Mexico have been built by private companies that charge tolls over a period of several decades to recover their costs. Another term that you'll encounter is regulatory chill. This is the possibility that good public policy could be withdrawn or never proposed because of the government's fear of being sued by affected foreign companies and investors. Shared value is the idea that businesses can enhance their competitiveness by focusing on social problems in cooperation with government and non-government organizations. Transaction costs describe the economic costs of performing a market transaction. It may be considered a friction in a market, such as transporting goods from buyers to sellers, or the lack of clear information about a product, and that creates uncertainty and risk. Transfer price is the internal price that a multinational corporation attributes to a product that it trades across borders between different branches of its organization. That price is fixed by administrative decision, not the operation of supply and demand. There's some concern that multinationals may use strategic transfer pricing to reduce their overall tax burden by spreading it across more than one country. Upgrading. Upgrading is the idea that firms can learn and improve the quality of the products that they produce, eventually moving into higher skill and higher value added activities, even within a global value chain. So now to the key concepts that we encounter in the chapter. And again, the first is corporate social responsibility. There was a disaster, a nuclear disaster in Bhopal, India. The Bhopal disaster represents an example of a worst case scenario outcome of the lack of corporate social responsibility. And another example is the 2010 BP, British Petroleum oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The slow progression of climate change speaks to how industry has lacked leadership on environmental sustainability, which is considered a social responsibility in our world, in our contemporary world. So CSR is a voluntary commitment that can involve the internationally established guidelines or firm-specific codes of conduct. Many CSR policies have no mechanism for verification or evaluation. An exception is triple bottom line accounting and the required independent audits. Regulatory chill as a concept is the desire to attract foreign investors, causing a developing country to reduce environmental social policies, which then creates what is called a regulatory chill. Industry groups in Canada, the United States, and Europe have succeeded in stopping their governments from adopting stricter environmental regulations. The process is also seen in many parts of the Amazon and in South Asia and all over the global South. So, if we were going to discuss this and debate, here are some ways in which we would do it. We could discuss corporate motivations to go abroad. What factors could influence a corporation's decision to go abroad? Second, we can research instances where a lack of corporate social responsibility had negative outcomes for a developing community. For example, think about the mining of coltan in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or copper in Zambia. Think about the ways in which companies treat the Amazon jungle. Are they being responsible? Are they conscious of their duty to the community? Think also about the use of pesticides in huge agricultural businesses, how these chemicals might affect the workers? Are the companies being responsible enough to give protective gear to their workers? Are they stopping the use of pesticides that have been found to be carcinogenic? Think Roundup, for example. So, a third thing we could do is to discuss how governments can act as important mediators between corporate interests and the development of their country. How is this ability affected by international agreements? We haven't talked about this much, but the World Trade Organization has trade-related international property rights that often work to the advantage of multinational corporations and external investors and to the disadvantage of local communities in developing countries. There are also patent laws that give advantages to wealthy actors internationally and take away the power of communities of indigenous people and rural communities in the global south. Let's also think and discuss as a class how emerging multinational corporations from developing countries are different from multinational corporations based in the global north. Let's debate whether these differences mean that emerging multinational corporations investments are more beneficial for host countries. For example, you have companies from China investing in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa. Are they better in terms of their practices than the multinationals from the global north countries, like maybe Shell, like, or other oil companies, Chevron. I don't even know if Chevron is still in existence. British Petroleum, um, Total, and so forth. Okay, let's also discuss the environmental cost of doing business. If you visit the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, or TEEB website that is hosted by the United Nations Environment Program. Under the Economics and Trade Branch, or ETB, of the Division of Technology, Industry and Economics, DTIE, alphabet soup, right? And you look at the arguments that are made at the websites that I will provide. How can industry and businesses do better for development and the environment in the context of the sustainable development goals? So nowadays, people talk about sustainable development. How does that work out? What does it look like in real life? Now, we could also discuss the question raised in this news item by Tom Levitt in 2015. How can we avoid peak chocolate? I'm sure there are many people who love chocolate. The Guardian published this article by Tom Levitt that says that a shortfall in chocolate is only likely to be averted if major manufacturers such as Nestle create a business model that includes and respects the rights of cocoa farmers. There are other problems with chocolate that, some of the farming is done by little children who should be in school. Some of those children are working under slave-like conditions. Knowing all this, is your chocolate still tasting very delicious? Let's think about it. So, there are many films that are relevant and many news clips that are relevant to this subject. And one was made in 2019 about a 25-year legal battle over oil pollution in Ecuador's Amazon rainforest. It's on YouTube. I'll post it. This video talks about the controversial story of Chevron's corporate responsibility in Ecuador. You know what? Nigeria also has its own story on this. Shell and its production system damaged the environment in the Niger Delta, where majority of Nigeria's petroleum is being produced. And the Nigerian communities have engaged in lawsuits that are lasting for decades, and they have won some. There's also the fact that Shell, working in collusion with the Nigerian government, was responsible for the execution of Ogoni activists in the Niger Delta, who were led by Ken Saro-Wiwa, a writer, human rights activist, and former government official of Nigeria. These men were executed by the Nigerian government under the military dictatorship of General Sani Abacha because they raised awareness and complained and protested over the ways in which shell production was damaging the environment, causing a lot of devastation, not just to the plants and the marine life, but to people, and creating conditions that increased illnesses, created new illnesses, and altogether brought misery. These men were killed by the government of Nigeria in spite of a worldwide appeal for for the government to pardon them. Another film we can look at is titled The Fifth Estate. It was made, is by the Fifth Estate, I'm sorry. And Fifth Estate created this film in 2013. It's titled Made in Bangladesh. And this tells us a very horrible historical story of the loss of 1,100 lives when a garment factory collapsed in Bangladesh. The investigation looks into the rights of workers on the ground while seeking answers from those who owned the company. Then Al Jazeera in 2012 did a feature titled Inside Story Americas: Time to Monitor Guatemala's Mining Sector. This video explores the tension and violence between mining interests and indigenous resistance in Guatemala. In 2016, Bill Vorley wrote an article that was published in The Guardian on the 31st of August, 2016, and it's titled Big Brands Like Unilever Ain't the Answer to Helping African Farmers. This article examines global brands that have attempted to work more closely with low-income farmers in Africa. But it acknowledges that informal markets may actually offer better terms to these farmers. In 2014, Harold Crooks did a documentary titled The Price We Pay: How Offshore Havens Are Silently Killing Our Middle Class. The Canadian documentary film on the history and present-day reality of big business tax avoidance is based on the book by Bridget Alpin. The multinationals have been depriving governments of trillions of dollars in tax revenues by harboring profits in offshore havens. CBC News in 2015 produced a Canadian documentary that probes corporate tax avoidance schemes. The CBC then writes a short piece that gives evidence about how multinationals avoid billions of dollars in taxes from the documentary The Price We Pay. The other things we could do is to look at a piece published in 2012 by Theodore Moran titled Foreign Direct Investment and Development. And this piece was published in the Wiley-Blackwell Encyclopedia of Globalization. And it gives us a quick summary of one of the key concepts in this chapter. There's also something by Christian Geisler Asmussen and Andrea Fosfori in 2019. It's titled Orchestrating Corporate Social Responsibility in the Multinational Enterprise. This was published in Strategic Management Journal, and the article discusses the challenges of building a global social brand through corporate social responsibility. In 2005, Ian Holiday wrote an article titled Doing Business with Rights-Violating Regimes, Corporate Social Responsibility and Myanmar's Military Junta. This was published by the Journal of Business Ethics. The paper argues that multinational corporations can actually improve the social circumstances of people living in rights-violating regimes. There's another piece that was written by Farhana Ferdowsi in 2015 titled Impact of Microfinance on Sustainable Entrepreneurship Development. It was published in Development Studies Research, and the article reports the findings of a study that considered the impacts of microfinance institutions on entrepreneurs. In 2015, finally, Tom Burgess wrote The Looting Machine: Warlords, Oligarchs, Corporations, Smugglers, and the Theft of Africa's Wealth. This is an investigation for the Financial Times by somebody who is a correspondent for the Financial Times. He tells the story of how resources in Africa are accessed and extracted through an opaque global chain of elite actors, and that this has led to massive exploitation on the African continent. So, this concludes what I will say about chapter 12. Or is it, yeah, chapter 12. So, we have interesting model and a lot of questions that we can discuss, debate, and really think about in terms of sustainable development and the role of multinational corporations and emerging multinational corporations. Are they really doing corporate social responsibility, or are they just doing PR to make it seem as if they're doing the right thing, but they're really just like glossing over a lot of egregious behavior? All right.